Well, I responded by saying that we will make it quite clear explicitly in the legislation that the twin strategy of ballot box and gun is not going to be permitted, and that all the things in terms of seats in the Northern Ireland Executive, in terms of accelerated prisoner release, they can only happen if there's real peace, a real end to violence, an end to violence for good. No, not temporarily, permanently, an end to violence. And, you know, I think it's possible that we can achieve that. But we've got to achieve it with people really making this agreement work. And, you know, all the time that we spent trying to put this together, it was agonizingly difficult. And yet, in the end, I think there is the will out there amongst people in Northern Ireland. There is the hope to make it work.
Boy, you mean, why do I think that we should not only condemn the Indian action, but take some economic action against India? I just think we need to do as much as possible to make it clear that in the world of today and tomorrow, it is simply unacceptable to build a nuclear arsenal. And it is unrealistic to believe you can build one and you won't use it under any circumstances. Therefore, the main purpose of doing it is to establish yourself as a great nation. That is not a way to define a nation's greatness in the 21st century. And I say that not because I think the firmer we are here, the more likely we are to be able to persuade Pakistan or perhaps other countries lining up behind Pakistan that they should not test, that they should not try to become public members of the nuclear club. We need to move the world away from it. I'm trying to get Russia to ratify START 2 now so we can dismantle our arsenals further and then go to START 3 and dismantle our arsenals further. I'm trying to take America and Russia in the opposite direction. I'm afraid in our own countries, we'll have people who say, oh, we better not do that if India and Pakistan and other countries are going to build up their arsenals. It's not the way to the future.
And so the message to Pakistan, there's rumours that they may be testing next week in western Baluchistan or whatever, would be that you would feel you should take the same action against them if they did.
Under our law, we'll have no choice. In other words, it's an automatic under our law. But what I would say to them is help us work with you to find a way, first of all, to guarantee your security without nuclear weapons. And secondly, to reconcile with India. I mean, look at Pakistan and India. You've got one country with 950 million people, another country with nearly 140 million people. They're arguing principally over Kashmir, not entirely, but principally. Now, if they could resolve this, if you look at the success of Indians and Pakistanis in the United Kingdom or in the United States, and you look at the talent in those two countries, and you realize if they would liberate themselves from this argument between themselves, it is quite conceivable that for the next 50 years they could have the highest growth rates and not just economic success, but the richest and most textured quality of life on the Indian subcontinent of any place on the globe. And so I think they should be imagining a different future for themselves, both of them. Have the rest of us failed to appreciate them as much as we should have? Probably. Have we failed to acknowledge India, the incredible achievement of maintaining 50 years of democracy under the most adverse conceivable circumstances? Probably. We should do better. But the answer is not for India to become a nuclear power and then for Pakistan to match it stride for stride and then for China to be brought in to support the Pakistanis and move troops to the Indian border and then for Russia to come in and to recreate in a different context the conflicts of the Cold War. It is a nutty way to go. It is not the way to chart the future.
Well, I certainly hope that they are prepared to do that, and there will be very, very strong pressure from the international community for them to come unconditionally into both treaties, and I think it's tremendously important they do so, because as the President was saying, I mean, if we have nuclear proliferation in the world, India, then if Pakistan were again to defy what is a very, very strong plea to them from the rest of the world not to engage in this, then you've got the danger of other states as well. So, I mean, we're dealing with extremely serious and threatening present dangers.
I don't think so. It could be, it could become sometime in the future an alternative currency. You know, people might trade in the euro as well as the dollar. It could become, a lot of transactions might be done in the euro as well as the dollar. But I don't see that as a threatening thing. I think anything that brings free people closer together and increases prosperity in a democratic way that makes it more likely to be broadly shared is positive. Oh, I think he's doing it. I think the most important thing I think he can do is to keep the commitments he made in the campaign, and to stay in touch with the people, and to not be deterred from doing the public's business. You know, that the people, when they hire you to do these jobs, they want you to work on their affairs. And then when you get in them, there's all sorts of static designed to break your concentration. You have to ignore it and stay at the business. But I think my advice would be to, you know, he had a very detailed theory about why he wanted to be prime minister and where he wanted Great Britain to go. And of course, I have a lot of sympathy with the ideas he put forward, and he's doing a good job of doing what he promised to do. And I think that's the most important thing. And then I think the more you get into it, then I think the more you begin to think about what's it going to be like when my children are my age? What's it going to be like when my grandchildren are here? And the more he serves, the more he'll have an impact on that as well.
I gave authority for UK forces to be deployed against Iraq. Operation Desert Fox was launched at 10 p.m. London time. There can be no greater responsibility upon a Prime Minister than to ask British servicemen to risk their lives for the sake of peace and stability in another part of the world. And I feel that responsibility tonight profoundly. I spoke earlier today to Group Captain Rich Jones, who is in charge of British forces in the Gulf. British involvement will be significant, and I thanked him and them for their bravery and for their professionalism. And I wish them well in what we would be asking of them. This action, of course, could have been avoided. Since the Gulf War, the entire international community has worked to stop Saddam Hussein from keeping and developing nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, and from continuing to threaten his neighbors. For the safety and stability of the region and of the wider world, he cannot be allowed to do so. If he will not, through reason and diplomacy, abandon his weapons of mass destruction program, it must be degraded and diminished by military force. Over the past few years, as you all know, we have engaged in endless diplomacy at every level and of every kind. But we must face the facts. Saddam Hussein has no intention of abiding by the agreements he made. UN Resolution 687, bringing to an end the Gulf War, made it a condition of the ceasefire both that Iraq destroy its weapons of mass destruction and agree to the monitoring of its obligation to destroy such weapons. Despite constant lies, prevarication and breaching of the agreed conditions, the weapons inspectors carried out their task, uncovering in the process vast evidence of weapons of mass destruction. In October last year, Saddam Hussein started to impede their work even more seriously than before. Months of negotiation followed. Finally, faced with the threat of force, Saddam Hussein averted military action by entering into a binding memorandum of understanding with Kofi Annan, the UN Secretary General. But, despite that, he continued to obstruct. In August, he suspended cooperation with the UN inspectors. On October the 30th, he ended the cooperation totally. He resisted all appeals to come back into compliance with the agreements he made. Indeed, quite the contrary. He used the time both for further prevarication and for the dispersal of his military capability. As you know, on November the 14th, I issued the authority to strike against Iraq as part of a joint US-UK operation. At the last moment, aware that he was about to be attacked, Saddam offered full, unconditional, unrestricted cooperation with UNSCOM. Again, he made that promise. We called off that attack. We made that last extra effort to avoid the use of force. The inspectors, again, as you know, went back to work. We said at the time, very clearly, very directly, that we would hold Saddam to his word, and that should he break that word once more, there would be no warnings, no wranglings, no last-minute negotiations. So we made the position crystal clear to him and to the entirety of the world community. Richard Butler, the head of the UN Special Commission, promised his report on Iraqi cooperation within a month. It came out last night on time as scheduled. It is damning. It is a catalogue of obstruction. It shows quite clearly, one more time, that Saddam has no intention whatever of keeping to his word. He is a serial breaker of promises. And the reason for that obstruction, for breaking his word, is also now clear. It is his desire to develop these weapons of mass destruction. He has not for one instant yielded up that malign intent. The threat is now, and it is a threat to his neighbors, to his people, and to the security of the world. If therefore he is not stopped now, the consequences to our future peace are real and fundamental. We cannot responsibly let that happen. Let me remind you, since 1991, the inspectors destroyed or rendered harmless 48 Scud missiles, 40,000 chemical munitions, 690 tons of chemical weapons agents, 3,000 tons of precursor chemicals, and the Al-Hakam biological weapons factory, destroyed in 1996. However, over 30,000 chemical weapons warheads and 4,000 tons of precursor chemicals remain unaccounted for. The UN and the world community have shown by the resolutions passed, calling for unconditional cooperation with the weapons inspectors, that they know fully the seriousness of the threat Saddam poses. Following the Butler report, after more than a year of obstruction and a catalogue of broken promises, which I have outlined to you, we have no option but to act. Our objectives in this military action are clear: to degrade his capability to build and use weapons of mass destruction, and to diminish the military threat he poses to his neighbors. The targets chosen, therefore, are targets connected with his military capability, his weapons of mass destruction capacity, and his ability to threaten his neighbors. We are taking every possible care to avoid civilian casualties. I cannot, for obvious reasons, go into operational details. But I do want to say one further thing. Our quarrel is not with the Iraqi people. It never has been. The whole world should know that we have allowed Saddam to sell oil to buy as much food and medicine for the Iraqi people as is necessary. It is a lie for him to say otherwise. He could have fed and cared for his people, but he has chosen not to. Our quarrel is with him alone and the evil regime which he represents. There is no realistic alternative to military force. We are taking this military action with real regret, but also with real determination. We have exhausted all other avenues. We act because we must.
Prime Minister